Appreciate you, Elizabeth. Chris Cuomo here. Welcome to NewsNation. So, the president got what he needed at home today. I'm sure you've heard. The House passed a short-term spending bill that we call CRs, continuing resolutions, right? Now, this is the easy part. Now it moves into the Senate, and the president has to see if he can get any Democrats to avoid a Senate filibuster, right? There's a 60-vote trigger there. That's iffy, okay? So what is this about? You know what it's about. Trump is having trouble selling his own party. Now, if you look at today, you'll say, no, he didn't, but he still does. That's why they did a CR and not a full budget proposal and resolution where they go item by item, agency by agency, because he wants to extend the tax cuts, and they want him to pay for them. So can he get the Democrats to help him in his effort? Expect the president to pick no fights with the left for the time being. That is a rare prediction from me. Now, here's my question tonight. I don't really care so much about the CR. Why? Because I'm not surprised that they kick the can down the road. It's all about what happens next in the major budget proposal, and that I'll cover in depth, because what they cut and how could get very tricky, and I want to keep it straight. My question tonight is this: can the president deliver abroad? This is the moment of truth for President Trump on a major campaign promise. Has all the placating of Putin and trashing of America's ally, Ukraine, fostered a ceasefire? Now we know half the answer. Today, Ukraine accepted the 30-day ceasefire terms that are on the table in Saudi Arabia. The United States also announced it's going to resume sending aid of a military nature to Ukraine, and the intel pause is over, okay? But remember what all these moves were about and all the slapping around of Zelensky. Lure Russia. Did they? President Trump seems uncharacteristically unsure.
Ukraine, ceasefire. Ukraine, ceasefire. Just agreed to a little while ago. Now we have to go to Russia and hopefully President Putin will agree to that also, and we can get this show on the road. I think it's a big difference between the last visit you saw at the Oval Office and this. So that's a total ceasefire. Ukraine has agreed to it, and hopefully Russia will agree to it. I'll talk to Vladimir Putin. Yeah, I want to get, look, that's the other. It takes two to tango, as they say, right?
Takes two to tango. Now, I know President Trump is not a particular fan of history, but we do all have to recognize Putin has a very clear track record, right? About 10 years ago, he actually agreed to terms with Ukraine twice after annexing Crimea, right? And then backed separatists in eastern Ukraine and then used that, which he was motivating, as a reason to walk away from the Minsk agreements, all right? Really dirty, tricky business, okay? So also before that, during alleged cooling periods, the head of Russia has said he was participating only to consolidate military gains, repeatedly promising to withdraw only to add more troops, as they did in Syria. Okay, if you Google the Astana talks, A-S-T-A-N-A, you'll see that Putin may suggest he wants to be part of a process and then back away. Can President Trump do better? Let's ask somebody who understands the situation in Ukraine very well, both from a military but also political perspective. Dan Rice, former special advisor to the commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces. It's good to see you in person. I'm glad you're safe. I'm glad you're well. So, first, easy. Do you think it happens?
I think today was a great day for the good guys. So we've had 12 days that have been the most tumultuous probably of the 1,100 days of war. And the diplomacy that has occurred in the last 12 days, I think, will go down in history. From the crisis that we had in the Oval Office, which was horrible for both sides, not pointing fingers to either side, but to where we are 12 days later with Ukraine signing an agreement for a ceasefire with the U.S. for land, sea, and air, along with getting, in those 12 days, all of the allies, all of Europe bonding together, getting the EU to put $800 billion of loans together. This has been a crisis of magnitude, orders of magnitude. The last 12 days have been fantastic. Now it's time to go against the bad guys, our common enemy, Russia.
Two things. One, I love that pocket square.
Thanks,
no,
sir.
I'm not asking for it, but it's nice.
Thanks.
Two, don't burn. Wow-wee! That is no. Now I want it. Now I want it. I'm just too fat. But that is a beautiful jacket. All right. Back to business. Don't distract me like that with that resplendent sartorial spout. Wait until Stephen A. Smith sees that. So, don't burn your relationships, of course. What happened in these 12 days? How did we go from you're a bum in public and Zelensky leaving and getting kicked out of lunch to this?
From a leadership perspective, I always say praise in public and debate in private. What happened in the White House was inexcusable for both sides. It shouldn't have happened. However it happened, let's get past it. What it did was raise a lot of things up front, and it caused the Europeans to do things that they could have done 3 years ago that they didn't. They came together and they bonded. The Germans came, the French came, the UK came. We already have the Baltics and Scandinavian countries already solidly behind this because they're most at threat. But all of a sudden you have countries coming up and they're putting in serious money, serious commitment, even committing troops, Turkey committing troops, UK committing potential troops. So what Trump did, I think, was the art of leadership, Eisenhower said, is getting someone else to do that what you want, but they make them believe they came up with it. So all of a sudden, the Europeans are doing stuff they didn't do 3 years ago, and they're doing so united. We have all of Europe united except Hungary, and we have the U.S. now working closely and bonded together. Hate to see the U.S. separated from Ukraine. There were 12 days that there were very difficult times to explain, but I always tell the Ukrainians, focus on the outcomes, not the process, because the process will drive you crazy.
So Europeans galvanizing to help Ukraine, balkanizing from the United States? Do you believe this is about them moving together but away from the United States?
I think their intent was self-interest, basically. When they saw Trump basically potentially removing from NATO even, they feared that, and they all came together. They coalesced, which we want. We want that. We love our allies. I love going to speak at the War College or Special Operations Command, speaking before the Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians, the Australians, the New Zealanders, but also the French and the Germans, getting everybody together. We can't do this without our allies. Ukraine can't do it without our allies. We need to come together, and in 12 days, we've gone from being bifurcated to all together. Now it's time to go to the Russians.
Do you think that this is set up for Putin to make it happen or to pee in everybody's tea?
I wouldn't trust anything that the Russians signed. For 300 years, they violated every single agreement they've ever done. That's why we need security guarantees in place so that when we do sign something, we don't trust them, but we'll have security guarantees in place. That'll be, however the final determination is made, troops on the border from multiple languages, kind of like the South Korean DMZ. But whatever we do, we need to make sure the Russians can never come back. They can never do this again. They can never violate sovereign territory. I would love to see the Europeans come together and say 91 borders. And I think the reason this was done in Saudi Arabia is Trump wants to go after the oil. Bring Saudi Arabia into the mix, give them pump up. We just signed a deal with India to sell U.S. exports. They're the ones importing Russian oil. The Europeans have put in the biggest sanctions this last week, biggest sanctions against Russia to go after the oil. Oil is funding this war. We're cutting off their oil. We're going for the jugular. They're almost out of money. Their budget is almost out of money, going for the jugular. And then they have to withdraw. And so I think that's what is happening. I think the Europeans have come together. It's wonderful to see. And everybody supports Ukraine.
Dan Rice, appreciate you very much, not just because of how you dress. Let's see what happens when we take the next step. I'll bring you back.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much,
Chris.
sir. All right. Did you know that there is a preliminary report out on that plane crash in D.C. 6 weeks ago? We all remember, right? The regional jet, the Black Hawk helicopter, 67 passengers losing their lives, right? Most have moved on. You're not hearing about it, are you? Not at NewsNation. Here's the headline. Not a fluke accident. The NTSB found significant issues at that airport that could have led to the crash that happened on January 19th. Here's the chair, Jennifer Homendy, at the press conference.
October 2021 through December 2024, there were 15,214 occurrences or close proximity events between commercial airplanes and helicopters. We remain concerned about the significant potential for a future mid-air collision at DCA, which is why we are recommending a permanent solution today.
Let's get perspective of somebody who checks every box of being a stakeholder here. Flew Black Hawks, knows the airport, and the pilot, the co-pilot in that regional jet, Flight 5342, was his son. Sam Lilly joins us now. Sam, I hope the family is coming together, and Tim, sorry. I hope, Tim, that the family's coming together and helping each other cope. I know how difficult this is, and I know that a part of the closure for you was making sure that there's accountability and that things get right going forward. What do you make of these early indications and what you're hearing on the military side as well?
Well, I got to tell you that I expected that number to be high. I didn't expect it to be 15,000. To put that in perspective, that is 1 in 62 landings at that airport were too close to a helicopter. One of the things that we asked Secretary Duffy for was analytics with all this data. And sure enough, that's one of the things he talked about today was we need to analyze this data. There's other airports where things like this might be going on. I want to assure your audience that flying is safe. I fly in the back of airplanes. I fly in the front of airplanes. I'm flying all the time. Thousands of safe flights happen. But there are some gaps that need to be closed, and this is one of them. What we need to do also is we need to share this data between the DOD and the FAA. I'm talking to pilots that were in the 12th Aviation. They didn't even know that they were causing or part of all of these near misses because that data is just not shared. This is something we got to work on, and I believe it's going to get done.
Well, Tim, look, my promise is the same as it's been from jump. Anything I can do for you and the family as you develop how you want to solidify your son's legacy. I know you were so proud of what he had achieved in his young life already. We're here. And the piece that's about accountability, we will not leave this story until it's through to execution of a better change than how it was on the night that your son paid the price along with all those other people for it not being done the right way. We're a call away whenever you want, Tim. Okay,
for sure. I want to say something. We've met with about 9 legislators. Mm-hmm. All those legislators, didn't matter, Democrat, Republican, left side, right side, we're all coming together on this issue. And we want to continue to look for that bipartisanship, and it seems to be going great.
Well, we're here. And if you need somebody to get pushed, just give me a name. Just point me in a direction, and I'll be the hammer. Tim Lilly, be well. All right?
I'll do that. Thank you much.
All right, take care. 4 minutes and 35 seconds. You got to stay on it. You get it right? Because time is the enemy on those things, right? It goes away. There's a new crisis. Do you want change? Got to stay on it. That's what we do at NewsNation. Coming up, Carlson v. Cuomo is getting some buzz, in part because of an accusation Carlson made that Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas wants to keep the JFK files quiet. The senator came out, absolutely not, absolutely not. Yes, so where are the files? Plus, the biggest area of disagreement between us comes down to a very basic question of science, at least for me. What it is and how Carlson's take explains a lot about one of the biggest struggles in America.
Genetics is real.
Of course genetics is real.
Okay, so
genetics is everything. What I'm saying is that race.
Wow!
What I'm saying
so genetics is everything, but race is fake.
Race is a social construct. He's on the same page.
Cuomo has built an incredible audience of people who don't view the world through the prism of left and right.
Leland Vittert picks up the story right now. Leland Vittert, he is tone deaf to groupthink.
People are tired of being spoon-fed everything they agree with. It's boring. We're different.
In a conversation with Chris Cuomo, Carlson claimed the Arkansas lawmaker prevented a key intelligence hire in the Trump cabinet in order to stop the full release of the classified documents.
I have no problem releasing the JFK files. Tucker could have called or texted me. He has texted me multiple times in recent weeks and asked me, and I would have told him that. I've never spoken to President Trump or any of his associates or administration officials about the JFK files. I've never objected to someone taking office because of their position on the JFK files.
Great. I'll let Tucker figure out whether he has proof of what Cotton he thought said or didn't say. I just want the files, okay? So this takes us to a discussion about government transparency, all right? That's what it was about. Here's the conversation.
Let me ask you a question that for some reason seems to have sunk beneath the waves. The JFK story, 62 years ago, the president's murdered. It's pretty clear that the story we were told isn't true. And it bothers people because it gets to a core question, which is the president capable of making independent decisions, or is there a threat of physical violence against all American presidents that persists? What is that? Why have these been secret for so long?
Look, the idea of the deep state to me is a convenience more than it is a reality. It's a boogeyman. Why don't they put it out? Because institutions protect themselves, Tucker, as we both know.
Really?
And there is clearly information in those files that are going to make the CIA look bad.
Just the CIA?
Well, whatever. Different agencies.
No, not whatever. I don't know because
I haven't seen
it. Well, so here's...
But it could be the FBI, it could be the CIA.
Okay, so I've always thought that. And then in January, there was a scramble over who's going to get what jobs in the new administration. And at one point, there was someone who was being discussed for a job in the intel world, and a member of the SSCI, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, Senate Intel Committee, went to the people making the decision and said, you cannot hire this person because this person will be certain to push for the release of the JFK files. So this is in 2025, less than 2 months ago, and you have a sitting member of the United States Senate whose main goal is to keep those files secret. And then you have to ask yourself, what is that?
Yeah.
Exactly. Why?
Yeah.
Why? The CIA has already been discredited. So if you're telling me that 6 weeks ago, a member of the United States Senate was trying to keep someone out of a job in order to keep these files secret, that is to protect the CIA, I don't believe that for a second.
So what do you think it is?
I don't know. But this is, there's no one at the CIA who is involved. There's actually, who's involved in the Kennedy assassination. There's no one in America who's involved in the Kennedy assassination.
So here's what I know. First of all, I don't believe that the CIA has been completely discredited. I believe in the institutions. They have to be checked. The media used to be in the business of checking the institutions. Now we're in the business of defending them tacitly because we have a president that attacks them all the time. But so Mike Pompeo gets in there. He's in charge of the CIA. Trump says, I'm releasing the files.
Right.
Okay? Somebody says something to Mike Pompeo that he then goes to the president of the United States and says, you can't release these things. And Trump acknowledges it. Now, do I believe that Trump did it under threat? No. I think that Trump just decided that whatever he was being told made sense.
But it's, and I'm not even speaking of Trump or Pompeo, who's a very sinister person. And you're absolutely right. Pompeo was the driver behind that. But who's driving Pompeo? The story doesn't make sense. And by the way, we have the file numbers of most of the files that have not been disclosed. So it's like Trump issues an executive order on January 23rd saying you're going to release this stuff. They kind of can't not release it. And yet now it's the first week of March and they haven't released it. So pressure is currently being applied on the administration not to release those files.
It seems that way.
By whom?
I don't know.
I don't
believe it's the Rockefellers, the Pope, and
I'm not even guessing. All I'm saying is we can say with certainty that there is a force acting on these people, a very serious force, to the point where they're embarrassing themselves because they promised they'd release this and they haven't.
But it's not just that, right? Now we get this weird story about the Epstein files. Who even cares? You know what I mean? I want it released. I believe in transparency. But A.G. Bondi, I don't have any reason to be anti-A.G. Bondi. And she says she's going to release the files. Now, then there's a story about, the New York FBI, they hid all the files. And then we're going to have to we're going to fire this guy who's supposedly, by most accounts, is a pretty solid guy that they had quit. Well, where are the files? Where are they? And because I thought Trump was the antidote to this. And where's your boy Kash Patel? I mean, he went in there to supposedly bust all this up.
I can't answer that.
He put out this weird tweet, that was very general, things are going to change and we're going to do this. And after we learned that someone under his control now, right, because he's the head of the FBI, in that office that's under him, why wasn't he there? Why didn't he go there and say, give me the files, give them to me?
Weren't you just saying the deep state's not real?
I don't know. I don't believe in the deep state as a boogeyman. What the hell is going on? But look, they're his guys. I'm just saying, why didn't he go there and say, give me the file?
I can't answer that question. I think it's a great question. But let's just use logic for 1 second. Clearly, if you watch this, in my case, for the same as you, 35 years, watching this stuff carefully, and somebody gets in office, I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing, and then 5 days later, they're like, well, actually, someone has called that person to say, there's something you didn't know. Here are the consequences of doing that. Someone has applied very serious pressure on this person. Pressure so serious that person is willing to humiliate himself.
So wait a minute. Here's the part I don't.
So who's that person exerting the pressure?
But you are uniquely qualified to get this answer because one of us can call the president of the United States right now and ask him. And the other one is me. So why don't you know?
That's a great question. And
it's the only kind I asked.
So what I brought to it was the knowledge that a member of the Senate Intel Committee, I'm not guessing, called over and said, you cannot appoint this person.
So why don't you expose that person, first of all, so we can start chasing after him?
Tom Cotton of Arkansas did that.
Tom Cotton?
Yes, correct.
And did you ask him?
I haven't. No, I haven't asked him.
What the hell's going on with you?
I'd like to. And
Kind of makes people suspicious of you, by the way.
Go
because
ahead.
If you know that Tom Cotton said you can't pick this person,
that is correct,
and then you didn't go to him and find out why.
Well, I need to sit down with him, and I'm not sure that he'll do an interview with me.
With you?
I'm waiting.
You are like the spirit animal of that administration.
No, but it's a fair question, and the answer is I hadn't thought to do that, and there's a lot going on, and I've been distracted, and I've kind of been.
Now I think you're part of the deep state, and just like that.
Think that I probably wouldn't be saying any of this if I was part of the deep state,
unless that's what they would do, is make me think that it exists, but you're not sure because it's actually you.
Here's my point.
Please.
I am really concerned, not just because, I am curious and I want to get to the bottom of mysteries, which is true, but I'm really concerned that the failure to disclose big things like details about the murder of a president in a democratic country, republic, that will convince people that our system itself is fake. And it's kind of hard to argue that it's real.
I totally agree.
If you can't even know who killed the president.
Transparency is trust.
62 years later, Mike Pompeo was working to keep American citizens from knowing who murdered their president?
And even with UAPs or UFOs, whatever terminology you want, we couldn't get more information. These things are all over the place. Sure, some are helicopters, some are fixed wing. Okay, not all of them. And they don't know? Of course they know.
Well, but what are they, do you think?
I don't know what they are. The point is that they know, and they won't tell us things, I think it is anathema to democracy.
Of course I agree with everything you're saying except one specific point, which is I'm not sure they know.
They have programmed, they certainly know more than we do, put it that way.
They do. They may know that they don't really know, which is the scariest thing of all.
Well, again, these are your people. Why don't you talk to them? They love you.
Oh my gosh, I have. And
so what do you got
and
for
I
me?
think
come all the way down here.
We don't
cross
know.
All these bridges.
We don't know. And I think that's kind of the scarier answer is
flying over military bases.
Shutting them down. And you shutting down military bases.
And you don't shoot them down and then figure out what it was.
Well, maybe you can't, so that's. So look, I mean, I think we're getting to the same answer if there is a very obvious mystery that's publicly known, there's public pressure to solve the mystery, to divulge what you know, and you don't.
Yes.
Then there's a real reason behind it.
Now, we're going to be back in 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Two things. One, if you notice, Senator Cotton didn't say anything about the context that Tucker Carlson had. I want you to see it first, okay, before I judged the senator's response. Carlson says he wanted to keep somebody from being hired because that person would have wanted to release the JFK files. If you notice, Senator Cotton did not address the allegation that he tried to stop someone from being hired in the intelligence community because they would want the files released. Interesting distinction. Second, sometimes I believe that when you play in the conspiracy space, you don't want the answers to questions because the questions themselves are more interesting. And maybe that's why. If it were me, people I knew, I would track down the answers. I'd be calling everybody. I'd be a pain in the ass. That's me. But that's because the questions, the mystery isn't enough. Now, when we come back, this is a tricky subject, but it was actually the most interesting part of this particular meeting with Tucker that I had, okay? Race is a problem in America. Now, I believe that it is entirely of our own design. That is not believed by everybody. And the distinction matters. Stephen A. Smith is going to come in after you see the next piece and get his take on what's said and what isn't said. There's my man. Looks good, no surprise. Next.
Where were you when every institution decided to hire on the basis of sex and race, which is the opposite of the standard you're describing?
Why did they do that?
From my perspective,
yes,
it's an attempt to destroy the West.
One of the longest, most stubborn divisions in America. I spoke about it with Tucker Carlson. I've always believed and was raised to think that this divide of race is artificial. It's man-made. Because we're all brothers and sisters, not just equal in the eyes of the law or of our Lord, but on a very basic biological, genetic level. We're the same, like 99.9% the same. But it turns out not everyone sees it the same way, and that could explain a lot. So you don't understand what it is to be American anymore?
Will you tell me?
I think
we got 350 million people here. What unites them?
Opportunity to live a life of your own making, to succeed on your own merits.
Okay, so the meritocracy, to be judged by what you do, not what you look like.
That's right.
Okay. So every institution in American life, almost without any exception at all, has abandoned that standard and now has something called DEI, or diversity hiring,
not
or
anymore.
affirmative action.
You just had an administration strip it all out.
They all do. Still in place. I mean, they're fighting it. But where were you when every institution decided to hire on the basis of sex and race, which is the opposite of the standard you're describing?
Why did they do that?
From my perspective,
yes,
it's an attempt to destroy the West. You said it yourself. What is America? You said it's a place where you can rise or fall on your own merits. And that's the one thing that's been destroyed.
Was it destroyed when women were given the vote? Or when minorities were given the vote?
Well, of course not.
Okay, because there had been a system that was limiting. You didn't have minorities being given the opportunities because they were minorities. That was something that America wanted to correct because it is the opposite of equality.
As you said, I'm just quoting you, my oracle.
Thank you.
That what it is to be an American is to participate in a system that judges you on the basis of what you do,
yes,
not on who you are, where you came from, what your parents did, or what they look like.
Land of opportunity.
Land of opportunity. Are you going to judge the person on the content of his character, the color of his skin?
But you weren't judging them
on his genitalia.
Character. And when you
know, it's hard to know that.
If you look at corporate studies of diversity does to them, it increases productivity. You remove the restriction.
There are no restrictions.
You won't hire them as often because of their skin color. Why not just color?
Then, okay, I have a simple solution for this. It's called standardized testing. And it was created in order to solve the problem that you described, which is bias. It's like, okay, let's just pick people on the basis of their intelligence, their aptitude. It's an aptitude test.
Right.
And that kind of worked, actually. It elevated not just WASPs, but, Jews and Catholics and black people and everybody. And then at the apogee, the top, we abandon it. And we're like, well, that's unfair. How is it unfair? It's the definition of fairness. You're judging someone without even knowing what he looks like or his sex on the basis of his performance.
I don't have a problem with standardized testing. I'm saying that you also have to be open to the reality that the kids aren't going to do the same on the test when one has had a good education and one has not had a good education.
It's not, there's a lot of science behind that. And the truth is darker and harder to deal with, okay, which is that intelligence is the product of environment to some extent, but it's mostly genetic. And as we got better at sorting the smart people and sending them to Harvard and McKinsey and, on to private equity, it became more obvious. No, it's true, though. It became obvious that the meritocracy was producing an incredibly lopsided society, and that freaked people out, and it felt unfair to them. The meritocracy produces an outcome that you may not be ready for, actually, because it's rooted in nature, and you can't change it. So these are super complicated questions, but I know that a system that rewards people on the basis of race and punishes others on the basis of race creates hatred and division. If two people apply to college and they're different colors and the one with a lower SAT score is admitted because of his race, that's penalizing the one.
I understand, which is why it's no
admitted.
longer the law of the country.
It's true in every college in the United States, as you know, especially the selective ones, including the one you went to.
But they changed the law.
They lie, and the Harvard case showed that. They were just like, we have too many Asians. You can't have too many Asians.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
What was interesting to me about the case is that it wasn't white people. It was Asian people who were saying that they were being discriminated against.
Right. So basically the way they shut down the conversation is by making everyone feel guilty about slavery, which no living person had anything to do with at all, and no living person I've ever met supports.
It's not a coincidence that people of color, specifically African American, are at a different socioeconomic level given how they were introduced to the country. Right? Because race is completely fabricated. There is no such thing as race.
Well,
we made it up.
I don't even know what you're talking about. What do you mean there's no such thing as
a black guy and a white guy? Their genetics are the same.
That's okay.
We made race.
I don't know what you're...
We made race. We made it. We made it a thing. Just because you look different doesn't mean you're different species.
Wait, I don't know what you're talking about. So you're saying that there are no differences between the races? So you, for example, the genetic predisposition to certain diseases is fake?
There are cultural, there are ethnic.
How is that cultural?
There are ethnic pockets, right? So Italians have certain things that are more common because of that group of animals breeding with each other than you'll have with Irish people or with Polish people. Sure. And then as they...
so you do acknowledge genetics is real?
Of course genetics is real.
Okay, so
genetics is everything. What I'm saying is that race
Whoa!
What I'm saying
so genetics is everything, but race is fake.
Race is a social construct.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, race is a social construct in some ways.
Yeah.
But there's no doubt that there are significant. No, I mean,
look, first of all, Irish and Italians are different cultures, right? But they're the same people. They're just different cultures. Speak different ways, eat different things.
They're not the same people. They don't look the same, and they're not genetically the same. That's not true.
They are genetically the same.
Well, that's untrue. It's factually untrue. And you can see it in all kinds of ways. What's the percentage of redheads in Sicily? Pretty high?
I doubt it.
Okay. So what you're saying doesn't make any sense at all.
That doesn't mean it's genetics. It's just where people decide to be.
No, hair color is determined by genetics. It's not a cultural construct.
I know, but I'm saying that having...
and neither is height or eye color or IQ.
Having more redheads in Italy is not just about genetics. It's about where people populate. Look at the history of Sicily. When North Africa winds up being there, right, and in power, you wind up having that mixed into the chemistry of everybody who's Sicilian.
Because genetics are real. That's exactly right.
Race as a thing we created.
Okay. I'm not exactly sure I understand the distinctions that you're drawing. I'm just saying there are differences, but you want to find commonalities.
Yes. And I think that, look, that's what the land of opportunity is all about.
But you treat people as individuals. Why do I give a if someone's a woman or black? I care about that person, him or her. Are you a good person? Do you do a good job? I care about you.
Yes.
I don't care about all your ancestors, people who look like you. This whole phrase, this term that we use, community, is totally fake. There's no black community or white community or gay community. They're only people, individuals.
It's a social construct.
No, but it's a way for politicians to dehumanize people, actually. I hate it.
Or fragment people.
But to treat them as less than human. You're not Chris Cuomo. You're part of the Italian community. You're part of the buff 50-year-old community. You're part of the former talk show host community or whatever. Like, that makes you less than who you are. No, your name is Chris Cuomo. You have a soul. God knew you before you were born. You have a destiny after you die. Like, look, to call someone a community, you, actually.
I get all the metaphysical aspects of it. What I'm saying,
it's the core of it.
but what I'm saying is, when you discover that women aren't given the opportunities because they're women, or blacks aren't given opportunities because they're black, in America, that's something that we see as corrective. That you
well, the correction has made the problem worse. We saw leeches as corrective, too. We saw radium theory as corrective, too. Like, just because you claim it's medicine doesn't mean it's not poison. And this has been poison, and this has poisoned our country.
Sure Max Protein with 30 grams of protein. Those who tried me felt more energy in just 2 weeks. Here, I'll take that.
Ensure Max Protein. 30 grams protein, 1 gram sugar, and a protein blend to feed muscles up to 7 hours.
With Allegra, you can stop being sneezy without feeling sleepy. Get 0% brain interference for fast, non-drowsy allergy relief with Allegra. It's a no-brainer. See Disney Snow White, March 21st. Rated PG.
Stephen A. Smith, host of the Stephen A. Smith Show, joins me right now. It's good to see you as always. What's your take?
Good to see you. Good to see you. Not going to lie, Chris, it was a hard listen to. I'm certainly not trying to cast any aspersions on Tucker Carlson, but just listening to him, some of the questions that he was asking you, I'm certainly not going to say that he's detached from reality, but he clearly lives in his own reality that I'd be hard pressed to believe is inundated with an abundance of black perspectives. And that's where I took issue with what he is saying. He almost wanted to say that race doesn't exist. He came across as someone that lamented some of the things that had gone on in society, which we all do, without appreciating why that is. Clearly, he is somebody that had a problem with diversity, equity, and inclusion, programs, policies, etc. One could easily surmise that he had a problem probably with affirmative action if you asked him, with civil rights legislation. I'm assuming, in fairness to Tucker Carlson, he didn't say those things, but I'm assuming he would have an issue with it because he's saying, hey, let's be all about a meritocracy. What do you think black folks want? What do you think Hispanics folks want? Asian, etc. What do you think they want? In this nation, unfortunately, history has shown us that the white power structure that exists, that has existed, has engaged far more often than not in an inequitable system. one they cultivated, they fostered, and they pushed forward. And luckily for us, as African Americans in this country, there were an abundance of white folks in this country who were conscientious enough, who had a soul, who said there's something wrong with this picture. And in my opinion, I think I'm talking to one of them right now, one of those people, which is why I love you, which is why you're my brother. I think that I interviewed one of those people a couple of weeks ago when I had the pleasure of interviewing your brother, Andrew Cuomo, because it's not just about what someone can look at and say, this is the way it should be. How about why is it not that way? How about recognizing the fact that because of the iniquitous actions that took place in our society by a white power structure, it forced conscientious-minded people to help push forth policies that would touch us towards equality. Why didn't he talk about that? Why didn't he address that with you? Why didn't he talk about the history of America, of white America, and some of the heinous things that have transpired that led to those things? And that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. We can look at stuff right now. We could say, you know what? DEI is wrong. Here's the reason why. It's not necessary. Here's the reason why. Along with a plethora of other things. And guess what? In some cases, you might be right. But to do so without addressing why so many felt the need for its existence in the first place is something that I think is unfair to a vast majority of minorities in this country. You know, and that was my problem with listening to Tucker Carlson.
I get it. I don't think that Tucker, I mean, obviously he can speak for himself. I don't think that he has an issue with legislation and the changing of standards, let's say from separate but equal to integration. I don't think that that's what it is. I think it's more of a precept of what's necessary. And that whether it's his world or though he's been exposed to a lot of stuff, he doesn't see the same need for corrective action that you do or that I do. But I'll tell you.
But he wouldn't.
Right. I totally get it because you only know your own experience. Right. And I have a unique blessing in my life, right, which you got a different appreciation for in talking to Andrew, who says you dropped the hammer on him, and, you know, you have a problem there now that you'll have to address with him going forward. That's not something I discuss on the show. But he and I were raised to believe as a function of faith, but as basic humanity from my mother and father, that literally you and I are only different because we're treated differently. That we are absolutely the same. And now, race is a social construct. You do not cut open Stephen A. Smith and see a black gene. And you'll see regional things, you'll see African heritage. Just like when I did mine, you saw Egyptian and all this other crazy stuff in there. We're all milkshakes. Okay. But I think that it is important that when someone insists, no, race is a real thing. There's a real separation between the two of us. I think that gives you a context to start seeing differences as relevant, and that intelligence is the next thing that comes. And one of us genetically is more predisposed to intelligence. And as soon as you make that step, all of the separations are now just logical things. Well, look, Stephen A. Smith, he may be stronger, he may be faster, but when it comes to intelligence, there's a difference. These are the things that you and I have heard our whole lives that we fought against. But if you believe genetically there's a difference between the races, it starts to be easier to accept that. I started from a position of knowing it's not a matter of science. It's a measure of society and social construct.
And I agree with everything that you just said. It is a matter of social construct, at least in my eyes, and the vast majority of black people that I know in this country, because we lean more on our experiences rather than books or people who try to intellectualize stuff and approach it from a cerebral perspective to explain, you know, what has transpired and what have you. And that was the danger of what I was listening to as I was listening to Tucker Carlson. I'm not trying to cast any aspersions on him. No, I'm only going based off the conversation. I don't recall ever meeting him. I don't engage in castigating him in any way. That's not where I'm going. I'm just talking about in terms of what I saw in terms of the conversation that he had with you. He was dismissive of the cult, of the racial construct notion that you brought to his attention, not realizing how palpable and how insulting, dare I say, that would come across to so many African Americans in this country. The fact of the matter is that covering the world of sports, think about it from this perspective. They were telling folks, they were telling the black man he couldn't play the quarterback position. You were telling the black man he couldn't be a head coach. You were telling the black man that he couldn't be a leader of men. Let's not get started with what you were telling the black women. And over the course of time, we've seen how exceptional people from all races are and can be, and we see how deficient others can be. Then you also have to take into account the kind of society that we lived in. Remember, I got left back in the 4th grade because I had a 1st grade reading level, okay? And I had undiagnosed dyslexia that I ultimately had to overcome. What was one of the challenges of overcoming it? I was in the streets all the time because my mother had to work 2 jobs, because my father wasn't handling his business appropriately. And as a result, there was a weight on the shoulders of my entire family. And so as a result, sometimes you found yourself running the streets. Sometimes you found yourself being preoccupied with things you shouldn't be preoccupied with. And as a result, that was taking up your time instead of you hitting the books and doing what you have to do. He didn't mention any of those kind of things. He didn't mention any of the potential obstacles that could lie in wait. He simply wanted to lean on race, talking to the potential intelligence or lack thereof of a race of people and what have you. And I just said to myself, wow, he really, really seems a bit detached from reality. I'm not going to be overtly or extremely rather insulted by what he said. I do appreciate the fact that he was honest and forthcoming with where he was coming from, and that he was talking to somebody like you on your level who is as conscientious as you are and willing to tackle those subjects. And I truly, truly appreciate what you did from the bottom of my heart. It's just unfortunate that he didn't see that as he was talking to you, the kind of things that I just articulated, he didn't take into consideration at all. He's in his bubble. This is how he sees it. It's not an emotional thing. It's rife with pragmatism. And to be that way is disassociating and dismissing yourself from understanding the potential realities of people who look different than you, who come from different social and economic backgrounds, who face challenges that you would never face in your life or may have never faced in your life, because I don't know Tucker Carlson, I don't know what type of challenges he's faced. It's just that I listened to that and I found myself being very disheartened at listening to the words coming out of his mouth. It was unfortunate. I'm not judging him in totality and painting him with a broad brush. I just talk about this conversation. I was not comfortable listening to him say the things that he says. I don't think he understands who he's echoing when he was saying some of the things that he was saying in the eyes of somebody who is not white. I don't think he realized that.
I mean, the interesting thing about conversation is we start in the same place. Everybody's equal. And we ended in the same place, which is you should just get judged on who you are. Yeah. It's this place, that space in between, that is why you have to keep the conversation going. Stephen, thank you for your perspective. I appreciate it. Added to the context.
No problem.
Always a gift to the audience. Thank you for being here. We'll be right back.
No problem.